Welcome, everybody, to A Balanced Life with Dr. Jacquie here on Black Star Network, and we are continuing our series called Putting in the Work. Today, we're going to be talking to some amazing authors and an author coach on putting in the work, an author's journey. I know you got a book in your head, you got a song in your heart, you got something you want to say, but you just don't know how to get it out and put it on paper. Today, we're going to be joined by Linda Griffin, who is our literary author coach. Also, Charlotte Avery, who is an author of a wonderful children's book. We'll be talking to Catrice Nolan, who is writing a book about her journey through breast cancer, as well as we're joined today by our Level Up coach, Dr. Tierney, who writes about all things just keeping yourself together. Welcome in, everybody.
Hey. Oh.
We look lovely today. I am so excited about this conversation. So many people want to write a book. They've got a story they'd like to share. They don't know how to get it out of their head and put it down on paper. So what I'd like to do for our dialogue today is kind of just dive right into, I'm going to start with Linda Griffin, because I think it's important that people understand first, what does a writing coach do? And how do you help people pull out what is in here and get it down on paper towards something that can be published for all of us to read?
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Jacquie. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with your audience. And the first thing I want to do before I talk about what a writing coach or a book coach does is to give you some what I consider startling statistics. It used to be that back in 2005, there were about 280,000 books that were published on an annual basis. Well, over the last few years, that has exploded, and over 2 million books are published every year. That is both traditionally published with a publishing house as well as independents. And so I like to start out with that statistic because it kind of gives you a level set. Right? If you are an aspiring author, this is the kind of competition that you're up against, right? Over 2 million books being sold. And when you think about that, there's a limited amount of shelf space in a bookstore, right? And even online, there's a limited amount of shelf space online. So when you think about that, your book that you want to write is going to be competing with 2 million other books, right? So one of the first things that I tell people to do is you have to find your people, right? Because publishing a book and getting it sold is you're fighting with all these other books out there. So what you want to do is talk directly to the people that are in your community that are going to be buying your book. And I know we're going to talk to Catrice Nolan a little bit later, because she really found her people, if you will, her breast cancer survivors, and she wrote her book because of that. So now let me back up a little bit and talk about what a book coach can do. And the first thing I would say to people is, if you're considering hiring someone to help you, and if you're not a professional writer, I highly recommend that you do that. But you want to make sure that you investigate carefully. You want to get referrals from other people who have used this person before, and you want to read carefully what's in their contract and what they actually provide. Because depending on who you are and where you're starting in your journey, you may need different help. So you may have an idea, but you don't have any idea where to get started. And so you may need somebody that's going to focus on helping you crystallize what the idea of your book is, right? And what should the topic be? Let's just say it's a leadership book, but there are so many things that you can do from a leadership perspective, and you may know a whole lot about leadership. So a book coach can help you narrow that down, narrow that focus down. Now, you may already have your topic. You may already have things already written. Like some people come to me, they've already got a first draft, but it doesn't flow. It doesn't hang together. Like the chapters don't really flow from one to the other. So you may need someone to help you structure those chapters. And then other people come, they've already had the book written, it's edited, but they don't know how to get it into print, right? And so you might want somebody that can help you get it and you and help your way and, kind of brush away all the cobwebs and help you figure out how to navigate through that journey.
Absolutely. And I want to invite our other authors in because you've spoken, Linda, about an approach to writing, and we all have come to it in very different ways. Charlotte Avery, what was your approach to writing your books?
I write about what I know about. And what I know about is motherhood and children and working with women. And so what I really did is I just kind of dealt with what are the questions that people are always asking me, especially when I wrote my first book, which was on motherhood. I just said, you know what, here I am, a mom of almost 3 kids, and they're just things that no one ever told me. And I was like, why did no one tell me this? I just wrote a book about it because I was like, somebody needs to know like what's going out in these motherhood streets that no one told them. And so that's how I ended up really writing that book and coming to find out. I didn't even do a study for my group because I was like, there are moms everywhere and there are new moms every day. And so I was like, I didn't want to give moms a book that was like, every mom is given What to Expect When You're Expecting. And it's like this really thick book. And I was like, nobody who's really busy wants to read a thick Bible book like that. And so I just wanted to write a book that was quick, that it was easy, that told the truth, and that was funny. And so that's what I did. I wrote about what I knew in that particular season of my life right then and there.
I like that. Dr. Tierney, your approach. Yeah. Talk to us about your approach to writing. And I say it like that simply because the way you speak, the way you run your YouTube is also pretty much how you write. So it's got this really light, easy, airy flow to it. But it also comes from a place of I really did some really, in-depth self-reflection about who I am and what I know. So how is your approach different from the ones that we have heard?
Yeah. Well, really, you just really laid it out. I did not sit down and think about first of all, I did not sit down and think about writing a book. Okay. Sugars, y'all have probably heard me tell this story about how I lost my good job unexpectedly. And as I'm talking to God about losing my good job and trying to help me get another good job, he started talking about a book. And I'm like, sir, I need to book me a job. Why are you talking to me about writing a book? That's the wrong kind of book, Lord. I know I said I wanted to write a book back long time ago that I thought was going to be a textbook because I was in education, higher education. But right now I need a job. And he said, no, your job is to write what I say. And so that's what I started doing. I just showed up at the computer, and I tell people all the time that I was just the vessel. I just showed up at my computer. And as the words flowed to me and through me, it went to my computer. And I didn't realize at the time that I was writing that I was doing exactly what one of my dissertation chair members said. I write the way that I talk. Mm-hmm. So when you pick up one of my books, it's going to sound and feel like I'm sitting right there talking to you. So I didn't take a technical approach, or I didn't take a very structured approach. It's very conversational because the way that the book came to me was in a conversation with me and God. And he just said, talk to the people, say what I'm telling you to say, reveal what I'm telling you to reveal. And I bear my soul in those books because it is really just me inviting the reader along a journey that I myself had to go on. So if you're wanting to get to that next level, if you're wanting to achieve your goals, then we're going to do this thing together. And I'm just talking you through it in the same way that someone had to hold my hand and talk me through it. So that was pretty much my approach, a very relaxed approach, a very comical, easy read. When you approach, like you said, my YouTube channel, my books, or just coaching with me, or just having a coffee with me. Actually, I should say tea because I don't like coffee. Having a tea with me. You're pretty much getting the same Dr. Tierney in whatever medium you're picking up.
I like that. All of these approaches lead people to saying, oh, I don't have to do this in one particular way. Because there was a time when you had to say, I'm going to get my pen, I'm going to get my pad, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do this and do that. But oftentimes doing this and doing that looks different. And Catrice, your journey is different. Linda did mention, about you finding your niche and finding your people. What has been your approach to writing, and did it relate to your journey personally, or because you had a tribe you needed to speak to?
So thank you for the opportunity just to share my own unique experience. And I think, as you've seen today, each one of us has a unique approach or a unique experience that brought us to actually becoming an author. In my case, I had actually gone through cancer treatment. It had been a few years out, and I was sharing my own personal story with others, either one-on-one personally, or perhaps it was through different nonprofit organizations, support groups. And as I kept sharing and sharing, people kept saying, oh my goodness, the information you have that you shared, I didn't know that. Have you thought about writing a book? And because that question kept coming up over and over again, I thought, oh, okay, perhaps I ought to write a book, but then I didn't know where to start. And I knew I did not feel like I was disciplined enough to write a book, which is why I then approached Linda to help me through that process. And so she pretty much coached me along the way, pretty much just verifying for me, hey, this is your community, speak to your community, speak in your own voice to the community. And so that's what I did. I spoke in my own voice. I related my own experiences. I shared with them the trials and tribulations that I went through. And we decided to put in the book a number of what we called survivor secrets throughout that said, hey, here's perhaps a secret that you wouldn't know unless you've actually been through cancer. But in many instances, this is our only one time going through it, and we don't want to go through it again. So here are perhaps some secrets that can help you along the way, whether it's managing expenses, managing the interactions that you're having with your medical professionals, or even with your family members. We just will a number of those items, lessons learned that I had personally had, as well as talking to others throughout my journey to help others.
I like that. Ladies and gentlemen, when we come back after the break, I want to dive into what it looks like to have collaborations, whether you collaborate with other authors, whether you collaborate with a coach. Many of us get those emails saying, girl, can't you be a part of my book? I want to write about this. I want to write about that. But should you? Can you? And what would be the benefit? We'll be back in a moment after the break.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase, and I'm here with a very important message. We are at a turning point in the Black community where we must have equity in the apps we use that scale to billions of dollars. But this time, we own the infrastructure, we own the culture, and we shape the future. And Fanbase is the future. Fanbase combines the free functionality of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube into an all-in-one platform built for the evolution of social media and monetization. With over 1.4 million users, that's real proof that we are shifting the conversation of tech ownership and equity for creators. So right now, I want you to go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. The minimum to invest is $399. That gets you 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $665 a share. This marks a turning point in Black ownership of social media. If we don't take this opportunity to own social media right now, we will always be customers to our own creations. And that can't go on. So once again, go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. We must own the platforms where our voices live, our stories matter, and where our culture drives the world. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. As you can see, I hope you have your pen, pad, and your digital device, because there's some wisdom keys that are being given today so that you can get what's out of your head and in your heart on paper. So ladies, let's talk about this for a moment, because For each of you, your collaboration, sometimes it's with God, sometimes that collaboration is with yourself, sometimes it's with a writing coach. I'm gonna start with Linda Griffin because we all get these emails, Linda, that say, hey girl, I'm writing a book. It's gonna cost you $500 for you to get in what you want to share. How do you discern whether or not you should be a part of a collaborative book or an anthology, whatever they're called these days, or if you should just do one-on-one with a writer's coach? And does a writer's coach help you find your chapter or two chapters in this particular collective? What does that collaboration look like?
Yeah, very good question. I really want to start by reflecting back on something we said in the last segment, and I think all of the authors mentioned this, but it's really key to write in your own voice. I always tell my clients, write like you're having a conversation and with one person, because a lot of people think about a book and, oh, I want everybody to read it. Well, yeah, you want everybody to read it, but if it doesn't seem personal to them, they're not going to read it, right? So you want to write as if you're sitting down, having tea or coffee with another person and speaking in a conversational language. The other thing that came out in the last section is short. Books need to be short. And when I say short, I mean 150 to 200 pages max, because people don't want to read a big 300-page book anymore. That's not where we are as a society. And so you want to make sure that you hone in on one specific topic, not everything that you know about everything that you've ever learned, and focus in your book on that. Now, about collaborations, there's some advantages to collaborations. If you feel like you don't have time, or if you feel like you don't have enough information to write, let's say, a 100-page book, then a collaboration might be good to get into one of these anthologies, because typically you're only writing one chapter. And usually the person who is running the anthology gives you some guidelines, like it needs to be, 300 words, 500 words, whatever it is for your chapter. And so there's some advantages to being able to say that, hey, I'm part of an anthology book. The disadvantage, though, is that it probably won't have your name as the author. It'll have the person who owns the collaboration's name as the author or / editor. And so it's more difficult for you to market it. So I want to step back for a minute, because one of the first things that I tell people to do is you need to understand what your why is. Why are you writing this book? What do you want this book to do for you? How is your life going to change after you write it, right? So if it's something where you want to get, let's say, speaking engagements out of it, then the book that doesn't have your name on it as the author might not be the best vehicle for you, because what you want to do when you approach these event organizers is you want to say, I've written a book and here it is, right? So that's kind of the downside to a collaboration. But if you just want to get your name out there, and especially if it's a reputable person who's done anthologies before, then it's a good way to get your toe in and get you some practice doing some writing.
Get you in some practice. Dr. Tierney, talk to us about that for a moment, because Linda brings up a couple of good points about, one, writing in your own voice, but then also, who do you collaborate with when you think about your audience or other people? Dr. Tierney, if you were going to do a collaboration, especially in your vein of leveling up, what type of individuals would you be looking for professionally or personally that have experiences would tie into that? Because oftentimes people don't know where to get the people to be a part of a collaborative book.
Yeah. Well, to answer this, I want to jump back to something that you were talking about before we went live here, where you said, okay, well, I already know that when I gather my sorors together, we're going to have an amazing conversation, and so just even in you saying that kind of answers this question. Who are those like-minded individuals that you already know you guys have a similar, not the same. It does not have to be the same. You don't have to have the same voice or the same ideas or, but there is a similar thought stream or process, or that would make for a good collaborative, that would make for a strong finished product of this book. So look at some of the organizations that you're in, some of the academic circles that you are members of, because that's where you will be more likely to find people that would ultimately help to create this, this finished product of a book. I would also say that you need to be very clear about, like, what was just stated, be very clear about what the intended outcome is for the book. Particularly with the collaborative, it's usually good to go in saying, hey, I want to hit these 5 topics. Which of these topics do you feel would be best for you, instead of saying, well, I kind of want to, and then you're just going to have a mess on your hands. So making sure that you are very clear about what this book is intended to talk about, and the topic that it is going to hit on will help you further identify who are your players that you need to have at the table to be contributors to the book.
Thank you for sharing that, because this allows me to pivot just a little bit when you think about the relationship between the writer and the writing coach. And this is where Linda and Catrice are going to share with me and the rest of you who are watching. So there's one thing to collaborate with a group of people in a book. Everybody has a voice. The person who is doing the collab understands where they want to go and they want specific voices. But then there's that one-on-one relationship of who do you want speaking to you while you're trying to put your work together. So Linda and Catrice, this collaboration that the two of you have, this relationship that you built between coach and author, how does that develop? And Catrice, what was that experience like for you working with the writer's coach?
My experience was good in that she held me accountable. Like I mentioned earlier in the previous segment, I do not believe that if I had not had a coach, that I would have completed the book. There were so many things that are competing in your just everyday life that for myself, the fact of writing a check is sometimes can be motivation enough for someone. But for me, it took another step. It was Linda actually pressuring me at times, and it was good pressure, to, no kidding, here are the milestones. These are the targets that we need to meet. These are the timelines you set up. Catrice, where are you at with this piece? It was truly, truly a coaching experience for us. So in that regard, it definitely helped to make me accountable.
I like the accountability word. Linda, talk to us a little bit about the trust. Because
yeah, I was going to say that. I think the big thing is, if you're going to work with a writing coach, work with someone that you can trust, because this information that you're putting into a book, and let's just use Catrice as an example, as she said, this was her life experience. It was a tough experience in many ways, and there were some joyful moments as well. But, you're sharing your soul, if you will, with your writing coach, and you want someone who is going to honor that. In addition to the accountability, saying, hey, yeah, you got to get this piece done, but you also have to work with a person who is going to read your words and say, well, I think you ought to emphasize this a little bit more, or this a little bit less, or why don't we bring in, as she said, we brought in stories from people who were in her support system, if you will. So a coach can be kind of a little bit of an objective observer to say, hey, have you thought about adding this? Have you thought about adding that, or taking it out? I worked with one client who had a very messy divorce, and she wanted to put some things in her book about that. But I asked her, I said, hey, now remember, your kids are going to be reading this book. So how much do you want to share? Do we want to take it back a notch to say, maybe we want to share, don't want to share everything. We just want to give kind of the highlights, because you don't want to have it negatively affect your kids. So I think that's really, really key. The other thing I would say a coach can do is, as Catrice said, I want to get this book out, right? I want to get this book published. And so a coach can say, like in the case of Catrice, we said, we want to have it ready for October for breast cancer awareness, because it's a perfect tie-in. And so a coach can then backtrack and say, okay, if we want to be online and published in October, then we've got to have the first draft finished here. We've got to have the editing done there. So they can help stretch this thing out so that it flows, that you're not totally pressured and, underwater, but still get it done in the time frame that you want to get it done.
So that brings me to the question for all of y'all. Where do you find the time?
Oh my God.
Where do you find the time to write with all of the things that are going on, the busyness of our lives, our work, our family, this, that, the other, and 10,000 other things? Where do you find the time to write? Charlotte Avery, fur baby mom, wife of one,
Mom of
7
four.
little people.
Yeah.
Where do you find the time, Charlotte Avery?
Honestly, and that's such a really great and possibly a loaded question for me. But I will tell you that a lot of the times when I'm writing, I'm usually writing when I'm in the car, but I'm not driving. And when my husband's driving or one of my kids is driving. But a lot of times when I'm writing, I write in the dark. And what I mean by that is I'm really writing at night when everybody is in the bed, where nobody's calling my name, asking me for something, the dog's not needing to go out. But it's really like usually in the late hours of the night where I'm able to really get my thoughts out. And I got to tell you, like sometimes, especially like the children's books that I've written, I have literally written those books. It's like God just gave me a download. Like the last children's book I wrote, I literally wrote that book on the way to church, manuscript, everything done. And then when I got home, I sent it to my editor and I literally wrote that book and on the way to church. And so sometimes for me, because, and I believe that the Lord deals with us and where we are in our seasons of life. And so God already knows that my time is really limited. So usually it's like he gives me these exponential windows of opportunity that just come out of nowhere. And he's like, I want you to write this right now. And that's what I do. And a lot of times it's when I'm riding in the car. A lot of times it's when everybody is asleep, because the daytime hours can be really busy for me. And even if I'm usually writing in the daytime, it never fails that because I still have kids that are, that are school age, I'm telling you, the school will call me. Now I've got to stop and do stop doing what I'm doing. And then like my writing, my creativity, it's just all gone. So a lot of times I write in the dark.
Right in the dark. When we come back after the break, let's continue our conversation related to time. Where do you find the time to write? We'll be back in a moment after the break.
They said the quiet part out loud. Black votes are a threat, so they erased them. After the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, Republican legislatures moved fast. New voter ID laws, polling place shutdowns, purges of black voters from the rolls. Trump's Justice Department didn't stop it, they joined in. In 2018, his DOJ backed Ohio's voter purge system, a scheme that disproportionately erased black voters. Their goal, erase black votes and political power. Yeah, that happened. These are the kinds of stories that we cover every day on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Subscribe on YouTube and download the Black Star Network app. Support fact-based independent journalism that centers African Americans and the issues that matter to our community.
Welcome back, everybody. And as you can tell, not only is timing important for you being able to get your work done, to write what you need to write, to get to meeting all of your deadlines, you also have to find space for your thoughts, space for your emotions, space to heal, because we all write from different places. Dr. Tierney, talk to us about time.
Well, Sugar, remember I said I lost my job, so I had all the time. I had a lot of time to just sit and write and think and write and sit and write and think. But within that, we've talked earlier about having the discipline, so having the time is just one component, because sometimes we're using that I don't have time as a cop-out. We're using it as an excuse when really what we don't have is discipline. You know, Charlotte just told you she wrote that thing in the car, you know, and I can tell you that when you have that book on the inside of you, that, and I've never had children, but the closest thing I can kind of compare it to, it's truly a birthing. Like, you got to get that thing out, and it has to come out. Like, there is no stopping it. So you will write in the dark, you will write in the day, you will write at 5 a.m, you will write at 2 in the morning or 11 o'clock at night, because it is pushing and it has to get out. So I want us to be very careful in thinking or using time as an excuse, because you really don't, when it's flowing and you're locked in, you know, and you're really believing in that thing, and you are saying, no, this is what I'm doing, and fear is not in there, and the insecurity is not in the way. Oh, that thing will run out in 30 minutes. I wrote my first book in 9 months, and I didn't even realize that was fast until I was done. And somebody's like, whoa, 9 months, and it was completely done. And I was like, yeah, it just ran, you know, it literally like ran out of me, you know, so to speak. And that's with the studying, and that's what God dealing with me on some stuff, you know, in 9 months. But what it took was discipline. It took me showing up every day. You know, it took me, and I don't mean necessarily like writing every day, but me being present within me every day, me listening every day, me being committed to this body of work every single day, you know. And so that's the thing that we have to make sure that we have that discipline, or identify what's getting in the way of that discipline. Or, as you just heard, if we know that our discipline is a little sugary, then we need to get us a coach that'll help us with our discipline and help us, you know, stay accountable. So I don't want us to use time as an excuse, when really what we need to also be focusing on is our discipline.
So that brings me to for our audience, I'm going to say that this is touchy, and I'm asking it this way because not only are there excuses, there's the readiness for your writing, depending on what you're going to be writing. There is hurt, there's pain, there's healing, there's self-reflection, and there's redirection. All of these things play a very big part. So Catrice and Linda, you talked about trust in that relationship, but when does readiness kick in? Because you got a chapter for it, you think you want to write it, but the tears won't stop flowing. So how do you find time to heal and find time to write?
I think it's unique for everyone. Myself, I mentioned earlier, I did not write the book until perhaps 3 or more years after having gone through my cancer journey. And I think it was because it was at that point in time that I felt like I was actually helping others. So it wasn't necessarily a tool for healing, but actually ended up being a tool for healing, because I was helping others. And as you're helping others, it helps you to become more grateful about the experience that you went through. And that the hope is that what you went through can actually be a lesson that allows others to not have to go through some of those similar challenges that you went through. It definitely helped in that we talk about collaborations. In my particular story, I had my own journey, but also realized that my journey was unique. Also knew that my experience was unique. There were others who were around me that were experiencing what I was going through and having their own specific challenges. And so the collaboration idea that we came up with was to have my mother and father actually write a piece of the story. My sister, who at the time when I was diagnosed was actually pregnant with her second child, she actually wrote a piece and shared her story about when she found out and how she felt. It was so unique in that we actually hadn't talked about how she felt when she heard about me having cancer. The first time I saw it was actually when she wrote the piece and sent it in as a contribution. And yes, the tears did flow because it did make me relive that experience. But at the same time, it was rewarding in that we have made it through. And here's where we are at on the other side. And we actually put a piece in the book about being on the other side. And in that piece, my husband contributed about how he felt at the beginning and then how he felt towards the end. And so the book, although it wasn't intended as an avenue for healing, it actually ended up being one, at least for me and my family.
I love that. Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, depending on the type of book that you're writing, it can't, the act of writing itself, of having for the first time, putting it down on paper, so to speak, is part of the healing process. And I also have a few little tricks that I help my authors with, because I teach them not to necessarily write in order, like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, because sometimes the words don't flow that way, right? And so I teach them to use a mind map that just has everything, all of their key topics out there, and then they pick the one they want to write about today. That way, even though you may be struggling with a particular chapter, it may be too much for you today, then just pick another chapter, right? And write on that. And that sometimes helps people get through this whole process. And I like what Dr. Tierney said about not using time as an excuse, right? You want to find, for your personal experience, what is the best time of day for you to focus on your book? And it may not be writing. It may just be research. It may just be reading over what you wrote in the last chapter. But, I like to write in the morning, even though I'm not a morning person by any means. But for me, if I can get my writing done, the first thing I do before I start getting into the busyness of the day, that's how I can get things done. Other people have to wait until they get the kids put to bed, and then, at night. And now we've got so many tools. We've got, all of our phones have apps where you can record things. I encourage people, if you're not really a words person, you don't feel like you can put the words down, then just speak the words. We talked about that in the last segment about having a conversation. And so having a conversation using an app on your phone and then having that transcribed a lot of times gets you over that writer's block.
Yeah, writer's block. Because there are a lot of y'all who are watching, and those of you who are here, it just poured out of you and it was like gravy on top of rice. Yeah, for some people, it is not that simple. It's not that smooth.
No.
Yeah, mine was not like that. If I can just share a story about my first book, which was written for the bed and breakfast industry. And I knew what I wanted to write. And I thought I had put it all down and gotten the first draft done. And when I went back and read the first draft, I was about to pull my hair out because it didn't flow. There were things that I thought I had said that I didn't. There were things that I repeated myself multiple times. And I was like, oh, my goodness. So you're right. It doesn't always flow. But, once you get the words out of your head, then there's always a way to fix it.
And if I can jump on the back of that.
Yes.
Because mine flowed. Once I sat down at the computer and the oil started flowing, it was flowing. I was, we writing this book until I got to that chapter on forgiveness. And I was like, Lord, you done talking? And he said, no, ma'am. I need you to go to my word, go to the Bible and read everything that I said on forgiveness. And I was like, you kidding, right? Wait, no. And so I showed up the next day and it was silent. And even when I tried, because I had the direction he had given me, and it shut down until I opened that Bible and literally went through the concordance and read everything about forgiveness. And he was dealing with me on my unforgiveness. Mm-hmm. So in that time of me writing, he said, okay, now we got to stop because now I got to deal with you. You need some perspective on something that you thought you had dealt with, that we are not going to write anything else until we deal with that, until you go talk to that person, until you go heal this thing. Matter of fact, call your therapist in the process of this. And once I had done that, then he said, okay, keep the party going. And that's when then I was back in the flow. So sometimes, like we said, this writing can be a healing, process, but we also have to allow that time for perspective, so that thing can age well. Because now when I go back and write it, I'm like, oh, that was so brilliant. That was so good. But I know I had to stop and actually do that work in the middle of writing so that I can continue writing. So there is no, this writing process is not a clean from beginning to end and everything. No, it can be real sugar.
I think we all laugh about that. And I'll bring everybody back in just a moment before we go into break. I think we have 2 minutes before we go into break. And I wanted to, so I'm going to preface this before I go into break, because Charlotte has written books for kids. Linda's helped people write books. And as you all are watching, you can tell that we don't write fiction. We tell the truth. We like to keep it 100. So whether it's self-help, whether it's personal experience and personal growth. When we come back after the break, though, I want to dive in with Charlotte, because Charlotte uses her kids in her books. And so we get permission from our kids to talk about them and the things that we write about. And Linda mentioned that too, about being important about sharing things before their time. We'll be back in a moment after the break.
Hey y'all, welcome to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network and hosted by myself, Rhea Baker, and my good sis, Jamira Burley. We are just two millennial women tackling everything at the intersection of politics, gender, and pop culture.
And we don't just settle for commentary. This is about solution-driven dialogue to get us to the world as it could be and not just as it is.
Watch us on the Black Star Network, so tune in to The Other Side of Change.
Welcome back, everybody. And as you can tell, writing can be so much fun. And we all enjoy what we do because we believe in what we say. We like helping people. We enjoy getting the word out and just moving forward. So, Charlotte, I'm going to ask you this question because Afro Izzy is about your son.
Yes.
And in writing, using your children, it's like preachers. So for those of you who are watching, all you PKs, I know you heard because your mama, your daddy, your auntie, your uncle, your cousin, somebody used your life story in a sermon and you were sitting on the front row just like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. Charlotte, in writing for children and using your own family, do you have a conversation with your kids about that? Or was this something that Izzy wanted to do?
I love that question. So when I got the idea to write Afro Izzy, I mean, it was totally inspired by him because, you know, Israel at the time, he had never had a haircut, you know, from birth to the time he was 9 years old. He's never had a haircut. And actually, he just recently got a haircut for the first time and now he's 14. But anyway, I wrote that book. And when I told him, I said, you know, Israel, I said, mommy is going to write a book about you. And he was like, really like, just so shocked. He's like, you are? Like, he was like really intrigued. And so he asked me what I was going to write about. And so I told him, but I told him that I also wanted it to be a surprise. But I told him that I wanted to write a book about him and his self-esteem and how much I loved how he fully embraced who he was as, you know, because he's the one who said Afro Izzy, because I would always ask him when his birthday came around, Israel, are you ready for a haircut? And he was like, no, ma'am, I'm going to always be Afro Izzy. I love my hair. My hair is part of me. And I love that. And I was like, gosh, I just want, you know, Black boys and kids to really walk in the fullness of who they are. And so even though he didn't know the story, he knew that I was going to write about him. And just his excitement and the fact that I was going to write a story about him, he was just so excited. And his excitement even made me that more excited. But the fact that I knew how it would impact other children, whether they were brown or not brown, whether they were boys or girls, the main theme of the book of empowerment and being who you are and loving yourself, it's a universal story. And so I told him, and I didn't necessarily ask his permission, but the fact that I told him and he was excited about it, it was amazing.
How does he embrace? Does he do some of the book signings and go to, because not everybody has a person that is the story. And so does he enjoy doing that? Has he ever gone? Because I say this because there are a lot of people who toss their children into their dreams.
Yes.
But at the same time, they never ask the child how they feel about being front and center. In children's books, we need representation. I think that it's very important. But does he embrace being public that way and go to the book signings?
So what he does is when people want a book, especially if it's not at if they're not at a book signing or whatever, people will ask me, well, can Israel sign it too? And so I'll tell him, Israel, mommy's going to do, this. Oh, I did a school assembly like last year, and I took some books with me, and I asked him, would you sign these books? And people will usually ask me if he will sign the book too, because there's also a picture of him, a live picture of him inside the book so people can see who he is. And so he loves like writing his signature, and he'll sometimes write a little statement where near my statement of when I'm signing the books too. And so he really loves doing that. He really, really does.
I think that's important that we give our children opportunities to be engaged. And Linda, do you work with kids, and have you worked with parents who help children write books? Because kids have stories to tell too.
Yeah, I actually haven't worked with kids writing books. Most of the people that I've worked with have been parents. Similar to what Charlotte said, I have a client, her book is called When the Bow Breaks, and it is about her daughter who had a natural hairstyle, always had it up in like bands and stuff. And this actually happened to her at school. One day it broke, it popped, and her hair just flew out. And so she wrote a book about that and how, whether she was going to be accepted or not. So it was all about self-acceptance and that kind of a thing. But it is very important for, I think, kids to also have a voice. And I know there are many young authors who write books about their experiences, but I have not worked with any directly.
I want to, if you don't mind, I want to add something. I want to add this. So in the current book that I'm writing, which is not a children's book, it's really about the hard parts of motherhood. And of course, I know about the hard parts of motherhood because I have 7 children. But in saying that, I wanted to say that there are some stories that I'm sharing in this current book that I'm writing, that I have had to go to my children now, especially that they're older, to ask them, I tell them, I want to talk about this particular thing. Are you okay with that? And if they're not okay with it, then I'm not writing it. But if they are okay with it, I feel that it's really important to let them know, to let them know my desire and why I'm writing that story, but not because it's outing them, but so that it's helping someone else. But I tell you what, if there's ever a time that I am writing something that any of my children are like, well, I don't feel comfortable with you sharing that particular story, then I'm not going to do that, because it's not just my journey, it's my journey with them. And I can't just write about something that is my journey that has something to do with them if they're not comfortable. I just think that that's like a complete invasion and lack of consideration.
Yeah.
So let's have a coaching moment for that. And I'm going to talk to Catrice and Dr. Tierney about this, because listening to Linda and Charlotte talk, there are going to be times where some things need to be said. How do you all coach family and others around you when things are going to come out? Because both of these ladies are coaches. Linda's a coach, Charlotte's a coach, Dr. Tierney's a coach, Catrice is a coach. Each of you became coaches because of your life experiences and what you offer to people. I'm going to ask Catrice first, and I'm coming to Dr. Tierney, because you have something you need to share. And you need to share it with other people. And the kids are like, and the husband is like, and the parents are like, no, we're not talking about that. Catrice, when do you have the conversation of saying, this is very necessary, and what's holding you back? Not like you're going to push them toward it, but sometimes we can feel that, okay, so what's the anxiety? Why can't we talk about it? And how do you move people to having these tough conversations so that healing in that regard can take place? Because the book is going to be printed at some point, but maybe I don't want them to know my mom had cancer. Maybe I don't want people to know that I experienced hardship, because they're also trying to get their identity together at their age in certain circles.
I think it is challenging, especially, children of, people who have been through cancer. It can be absolutely a difficult time for them. And we recognize that for our children when they're going through the experience. And I think that's one of the reasons why we waited a few years, right? You have to have some time to heal from those moments. Sometimes it can be a little bit too fresh. Sometimes time helps to heal. Time helps you to have those opportunities for conversations about how they felt going through that experience. And it also helps to, maybe bring back into the story to say, hey, this was a difficult moment that our family went through. And here's how we handled it, right, wrong, or indifferent. These are the challenges that we face. And based upon that challenge, here's how someone may or may not choose to handle the situation when they find themselves in that similar journey of cancer. There were some instances that my husband, he wrote and contributed some pieces to the book. And it was actually because of me asking him to write that he was able to face some of the things that he was uncomfortable with. But once he wrote it down, he felt way more comfortable sharing it with others. So it goes back to the conversation we had earlier about the healing part. Sometimes the book has forced us to actually talk about the situation, talk about what's uncomfortable, and talk about what we could do to make the situation perhaps more comfortable so that we can share it for others so that they can also experience that similar healing.
Absolutely. When we come back after the break, I'm going to dive in with Dr. Tierney because we need to talk about how do you coach yourself, coach your family, coach people around you to be ready for what you have to say. Because guess what? It's coming out in print. We'll be back in a moment after the break.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase, and I'm here with a very important message. We are at a turning point in the Black community where we must have equity in the apps we use that scale to billions of dollars. But this time, we own the infrastructure, we own the culture, and we shape the future. And Fanbase is the future. Fanbase combines the free functionality of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube into an all-in-one platform built for the evolution of social media and monetization. With over 1.4 million users, that's real proof that we are shifting the conversation of tech ownership and equity for creators. So right now, I want you to go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. The minimum to invest is $399. That gets you 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $665 a share. This marks a turning point in Black ownership of social media. If we don't take this opportunity to own social media right now, we will always be customers to our own creations. And that can't go on. So once again, go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. We must own the platforms where our voices live, our stories matter, and where our culture drives the world. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. And so, these are the difficult conversations that authors have, that writers have, that coaches have with individuals who are in this space of healing and self-discovery and wanting to share information for the greater good. Dr. Tierney, walk us through this journey of moving people along so that things can keep moving along in this sphere of being an author and writer.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of an author. Okay. When I wrote my first book, I'll never forget, I sent it to my editor and the first 3 chapters or something. And my editor called me and said, "You just over there butt naked, no socks on, no nothing. You just really out here just truth telling. It's just telling on yourself. It's just telling that, and it's a very vulnerable space to be in, but what I realized in writing that first book was that was part of my calling, was to tell the truth, even if that meant telling on myself. I spill my own tea. Y'all have heard me say that. And that in that transparency, that's where healing comes. Because maybe if you hear me say it, then that'll give you the courage to be able to say it so that you can get released from it too. And so in me realizing that and writing my first book, my friends, everybody, my family, they would I tell them, hey, if you don't want me to talk about it, don't do it. because God has told me to. So one day he gonna make me tell it. He gonna make me tell it on myself. I mean, that is something I tell to myself, girl, don't do that. Because if you say that, God gonna make you tell it. He gonna make you tell it to a lot of people, either in a book, on YouTube. He gonna make you tell it, And so not from a place of condemnation or shame, but from that place of healing. This is part of what I've been called to do as a coach, as a author, as a media personality. Okay. So I put that out there for my family saying, hey, that's part of my calling. I have to tell it. But in the telling it, though, I'm always going to be respectful. I'm always going to make sure that I'm covering the people that I'm telling it. So in my first book, I had to talk about my tumultuous relationship with my father. I talked about in a situation with my cousin. But I went to them and said, hey, I have to talk about this. Is it okay if I talk about it? And they both were like, yeah, tell it. I mean, hey, now there were some other things that I had to tell that were purely mine, but were connected to some people. And in those cases, I obscured the name, the place, the time, the gender, the role, the title, so that you will never know who that person is. The reader would never know exactly who I'm talking about, but the thing, the story, the healing, the transformation that happened in it is what I have to tell. So I'm being very, very clear as I'm saying this, because a lot of times when we are the truth tellers, we think that to keep it 100, we got to air all the dirty laundry and embarrass everybody. No, there should always be a level of respect. There should always be covering. There should always be decorum, sugar. And so you can tell the truth and still give the other person the right to their story. We can always know what to tell and what not to tell and when to tell, what to tell, but there is that element that says, hey, if we don't tell it, then we won't get healed from it. And before the book was released, I went to the individuals that are in the book that you will never know who they are. And I starred the little pages and I let them read it first. And they looked at me and said, you talking about me, ain't it? Yeah, sure, I'm talking about you. And they said, thank you for how you handled it, because you are telling the truth. And I didn't realize that this is how and it started a whole conversation that then led to some healing on their part. But because of how I handled them with respect, of how I covered them and gave them the opportunity to then make the decision of how they wanted to walk through their trauma, their triggers, their hurt, is what then helped the healing. So whenever we are telling it, it's not that we shouldn't tell it. We just got to sweep it under the rug, because then it doesn't ever get healed. But we should always be mindful in how we're telling it and when we're telling it, and making sure that we are always handling everyone that we are talking about, whether they've given us their permission or not, or if it's our story, if God has given us our permission. We should always handle it with respect and never leave anyone feeling embarrassed or uncovered or in shame, because that's not what this is about, sugar.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So sometimes we write books, and when we write books, some of the things that people that we write about, some of those people are not living anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm hearing what Dr. Tierney is saying about, writing with respect and dignity and what have you. And, sometimes people write books and they wait to write them after a person dies, so that they can really write to the depth and breadth of what was inside of them. Mm-hmm. And so, Dr. Tierney, I'm just wondering, even though Dr. Jackie's doing this interview, but I'm wondering, what do you think? What do you say about that? Well, if you're writing a story or you're telling something, what if the person is dead now? Can you feel free to now not out them per se, but to not, to say, what, my person did such and such, and so on and so forth. How do you feel about that, Dr. Tierney?
Yeah. I think that's an individual decision based on that individual's healing process, and who else may be connected in that individual's scenario. So maybe grandmama is gone, but auntie is connected to whatever was there. So it may boomerang back on auntie. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So just making sure that we are really taking inventory of all of the players, all of the scenarios, that are connected. So yeah, grandmama might be gone and you may feel, okay, now I can release myself from, this and tell this story, but making sure that those that love grandmama and those that might have been still connected to it, maybe we don't say it was grandmama. Maybe we say, I got a friend whose grandmama, there's different ways that we can still tell it. And maybe it doesn't create this ripple effect of hurt. Now, in saying that, sometimes, Sugar, it is that the Band-Aid just got to be ripped off. Okay, grandmama gone to glory. Well, let me tell you about my grandmama, and what that then did. But again, in the way that we tell it, we don't have to, just run grandmama into the ground. We can still tell the story in a way that says grandmama did the best that she could with what she knew. And here's where grandmama was coming from. But even in that, here's the hurt. That, that, so making sure that the story has balance and it's not just an expose, to their dirty laundry, and I think that's where that heart posture and that intent comes in. This is why we give the perspective. We need that perspective, and we need to make sure that we are healed, because my story is going to be different if I'm still sitting over here hurting from what grandmama said, as opposed to if I have healed. Then the way that I look at the situation, the way I talk about the situation will be from a healed place, and healing begets healing. Yeah. Hurt begets hurt. So if we are telling the story from a place of hurt, all it's going to do is hurt. Yes. But if we're telling the story from a place of healing, then it's going to get us more healing. And even if auntie is connected to that story, this may usher in auntie's healing instead of just opening more wounds to hurt, others that are in the scenario. So that's why it's important, Sugar, that we make sure that we have done our work, before we start kind of telling these stories, particularly where other people, are connected.
Mm-hmm. And if I can chime in for a minute as well, it's not always other people. It may be the author themselves. One of my clients who is very, very successful, corporate job, that kind of a thing, but in her earlier years, she went through some things, right? Abuse and other things. And she wanted to write this book about her healing process. But at the same time, she was really struggling because she said, do I really want the people I work with to know that this is my story? And we talked about, should she use a pen name? But I discouraged her from doing that because I said, well, if you use a pen name, how are you going to get it out to the people that you really connect with, right? That connect with you and your story, if it has somebody else's name on it or a pen name on it. And so we went around, we had some very serious conversations about that. Ultimately, she did decide to use her own name, and her book was really well received, because the thing is, what people don't realize is you feel like you're the only one going through something when there's a lot of other people going through the same thing. Absolutely. And the fact that you tell your story, as I think Dr. Tierney or maybe Charlotte said, it allows people to feel like they're not alone and that it's okay for them to heal too.
Yes, absolutely.
All of those are great because people need to know that there is a place for them and the work that they want to do. And as we prepare to close this particular block, I want you to go around and share one of two things: write, W-R-I-T-E, with, or write from, W-R-I-T-E. What is this place that people should write with or that they should write from when they begin this process? Because clearly you can't write from being broken, which you can, but then Linda's going to come in and it's going to be 10 times more of the editing because it's always the cutting floor of those type things. But there's a place where you need to write from or you need to write with. So Charlotte.
I think for me, I think you need to write from a place of truth. And for me, I write from a place of truth and from a place of humor, because there's so many heavy things. And I just think sometimes we just need to be able to kind of make some things lighter. And so for me, it's write from a place of truth, but also from a place of humor.
Absolutely. Catrice.
I write from a place of empowerment. I'm a natural advocate, and having gone through that cancer journey, I encountered so many people who did not feel empowered. And so just want to use my story to empower others to say, you might not think you have the fight, but you do, and here's how.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely. Linda.
I would say write with authenticity. You have to be who you are, and your book should reflect that. And I like to say that every one of us has wisdom to share, and there are people who need that wisdom. So just get your story out there authentically.
Absolutely. Dr. T.
Yeah, I think because of what we were just talking about, I'm going to say right from a place of healing and perspective. Give yourself the time, the grace to walk through what you need to walk through, for you to process what you need to process, and to be able to sit back and look at that thing a little bit and say, okay, now I'm ready. And then write whatever it is. And I don't care if it's a children's book, a self-help, or fiction, or whatever it is, but giving yourself that time to heal and to get some perspective on it will go a long way.
When we come back, I'll give my reflection after the break.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase, and I'm here with a very important message. We are at a turning point in the Black community where we must have equity in the apps we use that scale to billions of dollars. But this time, we own the infrastructure, we own the culture, and we shape the future. And Fanbase is the future. Fanbase combines the free functionality of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube into an all-in-one platform built for the evolution of social media and monetization. With over 1.4 million users, that's real proof that we are shifting the conversation of tech ownership and equity for creators. So right now, I want you to go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. The minimum to invest is $399. That gets you 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $665 a share. This marks a turning point in Black ownership of social media. If we don't take this opportunity to own social media right now, we will always be customers to our own creations. And that can't go on. So once again, go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. We must own the platforms where our voices live, our stories matter, and where our culture drives the world. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. And as you can tell, putting in the work in author's journey requires you to be all in. Head, heart, mind, body, and soul. You got a story to tell. You got people that need to be helped. And you are the one who's been given the voice and opportunity to do so. I hope that we've said something here today that will get you onto your author's journey. And of course, Linda Griffin has the 411. Thank you all for watching. Bye now.